time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Corn Myers. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. Sand table. My students at Davis had the best time with the sand table. They thought that they were playing, but I do believe they learned more about history right there in the sand than they did out of their books. Oh, we used the books all right, but then we would play act it out in the sand. My first year at Davis, the students and I had made animals and people out of paper mache and log cabins out of twigs and bark. This year we would add to the collection. I made the frame for the sandbox, which was 5 or 6 feet long and 2 feet wide and about 1 foot deep, with short legs so the little ones could see and reach inside without standing on their toes. I waited until school started and had the students carry buckets of sand to put in the table. I didn't have to worry about finding sand. There was plenty of that. That's why it was called Sand Hill. The first thing we did was make more animals and people and things like trees and mountains to add to what I had left from the year before. We made them out of paper mache and cardboard and things like that. For the trees, the children had to go out and collect leaves from all the different kinds of trees. We attached 1 or 2 leaves to a twig, and when they needed a tree, they would push the twig into the sand. They had to learn to identify each kind of tree by the leaves. The children loved working with paper mache. When we used the things they had made in an illustration, the children would stick them into the sand so they would stand up. It worked real well. The first time we used the sand table at Sand Hill was for an illustration about pioneers and how they cleared the land and built their cabins. Then we added onto it to make a farm scene. We made barns and outbuildings. I got so tickled at this one little girl. I was explaining each step, and the children were so excited about getting everything, all the animals and buildings, in the sand table that they were getting way ahead of me. I said, "Wait a minute, hold your horses, just hold your horses." And this one little girl reached over and picked up all the horses that we had. She stood there holding them, and everybody roared. She thought I meant for her to actually pick them up and hold them, you know. Ben and I decided to get married, 9/21/34. The worst thing about teaching for me was the monthly Saturday meetings in Newport. Plus, most months I would have to go back into town on another Saturday to buy supplies for some project or other. Making the most of those trips whenever I was in town, I always bought whatever groceries we needed. Every time I went into Newport, either Mama or Papa would walk me all the way to Del Rio, where I would take the train on into town. Then that afternoon, the other one would come back for me. Usually Papa and I would take the short path over the mountain early in the morning, which was only 4 or 5 miles. But that was much too difficult for Mama. It was easier for her to come the 7 miles by road. That made a total of about 10 miles for Papa to walk and 14 miles for Mama every Saturday that I went into Newport. Mama usually rode on the mule instead of walking all that way. Then on the way back, she would sometimes hold a bag of groceries while she rode, and I would carry the rest. Other times, we would put my supplies or groceries into 2 cloth bags that I then tied together and put over the mule's shoulders. I just hated more than anything that Mama and Papa had to go all that way with me. That was too much for them to do. They had already done that for 1 year, and I didn't want them to have to do it anymore. Mama and Papa were getting old, but Papa was so stubborn, even more stubborn than I was. He was not about to allow one of his daughters to walk all that way alone, and I for sure couldn't convince him otherwise. It was something that simply wasn't permitted. One Friday, on my way home from school, I stopped at our mailbox down there where my grandparents lived. There was a notice in the mail from my eye doctor in Johnson City saying my glasses were ready for me to pick up. The next day was when I was to go to my faculty meeting in Newport and pick up my check. After that, I could go into Johnson City to see about my glasses, and it seemed to me like the perfect opportunity to get married. That would free Mama and Papa from having to walk everywhere with me. If we got married, it would have to be kept a secret because when I signed my teaching contract, I had to agree to a whole sheet of rules. I had promised to resign from my teaching position if I got drunk, went to a roadhouse or a dance, smoked, or rode in a carriage or car with any man excluding my family members. Married teachers had to agree to resign for the rest of the school year if they became pregnant, and if single teachers got married during this school year, they also had to agree to resign for the rest of the year. Ben and I could get married in Johnson City, and that way no one here would know about it. Seeing about my glasses would be the only time I would have a reason to go there. I wasn't going to go another time and have to lie about why I was in Johnson City. Thinking about it now, I don't really believe it would have mattered to the superintendent or anyone else in the school district. They didn't seem to care anything at all about what went on back here in the coves and hollows. Well, after I got the mail that day, I started walking up the road to my house thinking about how I was going to tell Ben that if we were going to get married, it would have to be the next day. It was the funniest thing. I was just walking along thinking, and I looked up, and there he was coming towards me from the field there at my grandpa's place. Here I thought I was going to have to go all the way up in the hollow that evening to talk to him, and instead I ran into him on accident. Ben had quit his job, and he was no longer living with his aunt and uncle. Instead, he had been living with his brother John, who had married my sister Beatrice. He was doing odd jobs around here and helping build a fence or something there at John's. It surprised me when I saw him there like that. The first thing I said to him was, "Are we going to get married this year or next?" That was the first thing I said. No hi or how you doing. I didn't even build up to it or anything, but that's the way I was. If I thought about something, I said what I thought. He looked at me so foolishly. I guess I shocked him because he hadn't even mentioned getting married since he had proposed. I knew he loved me. I wasn't worried about that. Looking back, I guess that was pretty funny just walking up to him and saying that. It wasn't like it is now. Back then, girls didn't say things like that. By his response, I knew I caught him off guard. What? Well, I hadn't thought much about it. I don't know. Well, I haven't thought much about it either. I wasn't even especially interested in getting married, and I'd told him so several times, but then I'd always told Ben that I would marry him someday, and then I would always put him off. I loved Ben, but my work came first. I had promised that I would come back here to work, and for sure I was going to do that very thing. I was going to teach, and Ben knew exactly the way I felt about it. Now it's up to you if you want to marry me. I don't care if we do or not, but if we get married now, Mama and Papa won't have to walk me into Del Rio all the time. It's just too far for them to have to walk. When we're married, you can go with me. You could even stay in town all day if you wanted to, and then we could walk back together. But if we do get married, we'll have to slip off somewhere so no one around here will know. I told him about my plan. I don't guess I've got any clean breeches. Well, forget about that. That's nothing. Beatrice can get you some washed and get 'em dried some way tonight. I continued on. If we're going to get married this year, it will have to be tomorrow when I go to see about my glasses. We can go to Johnson City, stop at the Grange, and get married while we're over there. You know we can't let people around here know what's going on. We can't let them find it out because I'll lose my job and won't be able to teach anymore this year. I just think this will be a good time, that's all, and we won't even have to tell a lie about it. I don't have any money yet, hardly. I haven't got but $11 coming from working. That'll be enough. I'm going to go get it now. You're going to have to get back up here tonight in time to ask Papa. I told you a long time ago I wouldn't marry you if you didn't ask him. I left him there and came on home. Ben went down the creek on the other side of the church and up across that hollow to where he had been cutting the tops out of trees to get the money they owed him. Asking Papa. When I got home, only Mama and Papa were there. Ben came over later that night, but by then, Papa had gone down the road somewhere, so Ben went down there to hunt him. While he was gone, Swanee Turner came over just about as it was getting dark. Swanee was at our house a lot. Sometimes I'd help him write letters to his girlfriend that he had met down in South Carolina, just like Ben's cousin had done for him. Other times we would sit around here and talk and laugh. When I heard Papa and Ben coming back up the road talking, I told Swanee he'd better leave because Papa was coming and would be tired and want to go to bed soon after he had eaten. I wanted Swanee to leave because I didn't want to chance him hearing about our plans. I put the food on the table and stepped out the door like I was going out to the bathroom as Ben and Papa came in. I didn't want to be in there because I didn't know what Papa was going to say or if he was going to tell Mama then and how she would react. When I did come back in, Ben was still back in the kitchen eating and Papa had gone to bed. I quickly sat down in the chair next to him and whispered loudly, "What did Papa say?" "Your Papa said that he didn't care." Ben went on home so he would be sure to be ready for the next morning. Mama and Papa were both in bed, and I didn't see any more of either of them. I don't know if he said anything to Mama that night about talking with Ben. Mama knew she was going into Newport with me the next morning and then on to Johnson City so I could get my glasses, but did she know about the change in plans? The next morning, Papa always got up first. He started the fire in the kitchen stove so that it would be hot enough to cook breakfast. That was one of his chores, and he did it every day right up until the week before he died. No matter how hot it was, we always had to have a fire started to cook our meals. By the time I got up the next morning, he had told Mama, but she didn't say anything to me about it. I know that sounds strange, that her daughter was getting married that day, and she didn't talk about it. She just didn't talk much at all. But that didn't mean anything. She was always quiet. Mama was a lot of fun if you got her to talking. She would play games with us sometimes, but she never was much of a talker. I definitely took after my Papa in that respect. Mama never did carry news or gossip either. Maybe it was because she just didn't talk that much, but since she never let us talk about people, I'd say it was because she just didn't believe in carrying tales. So that morning, Mom and I got dressed and ready to go. I wondered if Ben was even going to show up, but when it was time to leave, he was there and ready to go. We went into Newport and then got a ride to Johnson City in the back of Jumpin' Spider. The same man who took the children from Sand Hill to meet the school bus in Del Rio used his truck that we all called Jumpin' Spider like a taxi, charging $0.25 per person. He would take groups of people into Newport or Johnson City. Sometimes there would be 10 or 15 of us packed in the back of the truck. When it was snowing or raining, he would put a tarp over to protect us. He was kind of a handyman too and helped people out on different projects. He and his wife lived with us for a while later on when we lived in the Mission. After we got to Johnson City, we walked over to the courthouse, but Mama didn't go in with us. She didn't say a word to us. She just stood there crying. She wasn't going to tell anyone we got married, and if anybody asked her, she'd just say she didn't see us get married. We were married by the Justice of the Peace. I didn't have to make up big wedding plans. All I said was, "I do," and that was it. After we got married, we went down the street, and I got my glasses. On the way back home, Blue John Smith, one of the men riding with us, suspicioned that we had gotten married and started singing to us. I guess he assumed that because we were sitting close together on the same feed sack. We had never sat that close to each other before. That old man sang "In the Pines" all the way home. When we got back home that night around 10, we counted our money, and together we had $2 left. That's all we had. It was a good thing we weren't going to start housekeeping yet, and we teased each other about that. Our plan was for Ben to stay at John's and I would stay at Mama's. I didn't figure we would be able to set up housekeeping for ourselves until the end of the school year. I felt torn inside. I was glad that Mama and Papa would no longer have to walk me everywhere outside of the community, and I would still be there to help them. But I was afraid if word got out about us being married, especially since now Ben was walking me into the train depot or into town, I would lose my teaching job for the rest of the year. There was nothing I loved more than teaching and community work. I felt that I was really making a difference in the lives of my children and their families, even when it came to some of the more unpleasant parts of teaching and training my students. Chores and discipline. One of the biggest problems we had around all the schools up here was briars. They were anywhere from being a mere nuisance to being extremely dangerous, especially for young children. There were a lot of wild blackberry plants that the little children didn't notice when they were out running around playing until they ran right through a patch of them. They'd come back with scratches all over their little legs. Those briars had to be cleared away. There was also briar plants with long shoots of thick, strong thorns that could tear a child's arm or leg wide open. A big bottle of liniment that I made up out of turpentine, lamp oil, and castor oil was always a part of my first aid supplies, along with bandages I made by tearing up old sheets. When the little ones would come in with briar cuts, I would shake up that liniment real good and apply some on one of those bandages and wipe their legs off with it. When it came to discipline, I intended that a punishment should do as much good as possible and should always be of practical use. Like the week before school, when I first started teaching at Davis, I noticed how many briars there were when I was marking off the bathroom areas for the boys and girls. I decided right then and there that those briars needed to be cut down. I didn't have time to do all of that, but I was sure that I would be having some students practically begging for a job like that. And sure enough, the first day of school, those two older boys showed me that they needed something more constructive to do than smart mouth and dance with the teacher. Before long, the briar problem was under control, but those old briars grew fast, so there was always plenty around. Cutting briars became one of the punishments I used at every school. The number of briars they had to cut would depend on what they had done. They might have to cut 25, 30, or 50 briars. For fighting or hurting another child, they always had to cut at least 100. After they cut the briars, they always had to lay them out in a row so I could count them. Then they had to pick them all back up and carry them to the briar stack. The children were usually real nice about doing their briar punishment. Maybe they just didn't want to have to cut more, because if they fussed or complained, I would double the number they had to cut. A lot of them laugh till today about how they had to cut briars. Sometimes, if one of the students teased another child or done something to them, they would have to do the other child's chores. Of course, they still had to do their own chores too. One time there was about 8 students who were to be punished, and I gave them the choice, as I usually did, of getting a whipping or cutting briars. The first boy, a mischievous little one and usually a troublemaker, took the whipping. Then he went outside and told the rest of them, "Don't take the briars, she'll make you do 100 or more. I took the whooping and she just tended to whoop me. She just hit the bench, she did." So the next little boy came in and told me he wanted the whipping too. Then he turned around and leaned right over that bench, and I wore him out. After I whipped him, he looked at me with those big old eyes of his just sobbing away and said, "Robert said you wouldn't hit me, but you just hit the bench." That's a funny part to stop on. We'll stop right there. Robert really was mischievous there. He went out and told them all that. That's just funny, isn't it? I mean, sad, but funny too. That he certainly was a little mischievous rat. Makes you wonder if they all got back at him. I really enjoyed this part of the Opal's book. I hope you did too, and I hope that you could understand me. I've had my book laying in the grass. Now I've got ants crawling on me from they were on my book. But I'm still getting over my sickness where I've been sick, so I know I sound kind of funny. But this was a really interesting part. Of course, her getting married and all that. Such a different time, such a different time. But it starts with that sand table. Doesn't that sound so neat? The way that she described how she built it and how she made it. And I can imagine how kids would just love to play with it. I think kids would enjoy that today, but especially then when, today most children have so many toys, they don't know what to play with first. But in those days, they really didn't have things like that. So to have a place where you could play in the sand and make the little figurines and share with each other and act out, she said pretend act, like acted out what they were studying, that was really amazing, and I'm sure they learned a lot by doing that. And then the funny part of that was the little girl when she said, hold your horses, and the little girl got all the horses and held them. Reminds you of Amelia Bedelia, if you remember those books where she took everything literal and just did exactly what, draw the drapes instead of drawing them, the curtains, closing them or whatever, she drew them. So that little girl had never heard hold your horses meant to wait. That was really sweet. Interesting to me about how particular, we've been reading about this every time, the last few readings, but how particular Opal's mother and father were about her walking alone. Like you think about the mother going and then going back. She had to go by herself, so it wasn't that necessarily that they were afraid of a woman going. So I guess it was just unseemly, or maybe because Opal was young, they were afraid somebody might take advantage of her or something. So that's really interesting. Also interesting to me how I'm always amazed with paths and walks and roads and things like that, but mostly the paths. Like Opal's father could cut off several miles because he could go through the woods, he could go up the mountain, and Opal could too, but then the mother couldn't do that, so she had to go along the road, which she did get to ride the mule, she got to ride something. But really interesting that they would, they didn't think nothing about the mother going by herself, but they would not let Opal go by herself, even though by this point, of course, she's grown. She's a grown woman. So really interesting and really sweet, though, how that was just what they believed, and they wanted to protect her and take care of her. So I really, really liked that part. Of course, the teacher rules, we've heard about these before in this book, but also in a book we read, Jesse Stewart, if you remember that in his book, about how they had all those teacher rules. It doesn't really make sense just because you got married. I mean, how they come up with that rule, if they were afraid that all of a sudden you wouldn't want your job anymore, or, I don't know, you wouldn't be as good of a teacher. So some of the rules, of course, were funny. If she got drunk, if she went to a roadhouse, all that, she was supposed to, if she rode in a car with a man other than her family member, she's supposed to tell them and let her go, just so many, it's just such a different time, but strict rules, and we know that was just the case probably everywhere, but especially in this region of Appalachia from these books that we've read. I loved when she was walking home and she got the notice out of the mailbox, and then she's thinking all this up, like, well, this would be a perfect time for us to get married. Opal's so sweet because she didn't want to lie. So she didn't want to make up like, well, we went to Johnson City to go Christmas shopping or whatever. She didn't want to make up something. So she could say, no, I have to go get my glasses. She was still being untruthful by not telling people that she got married, but sweet that she thought of it like that, like she was getting out of telling a lie. And again, strange, but just a different time of how when she told Ben, it's funny that she runs into him and then they start talking about it. My favorite line of that part, I wrote it down, was, I don't guess I've got any clean breeches. That's what he said. I guess I've got any clean breeches. That just tickled me to death. Plus, I thought it was really sweet. Again, different time. Like right now, you're probably like me. You've probably got 5 or 6 pairs of clean breeches in your closet that you could go put on if you had to go somewhere. But in those days, they didn't. They had very little. Opal's told us about that. About if you were really lucky if you had 2 dresses, one for church and one for play, one for every day. So just a different time in that. But I love that was one of his first things he said. And we hadn't got to know Ben as well, but just from this little back and forth, obviously he loves Opal, and he's kind of went along with everything, how she said no ring and not now, and just but kept coming around, so he obviously loves her. But he seems like he's pretty practical too, like he's about like she is. And anyway, I love that whole little exchange and him saying about that. And then she tells him he's got to come and ask Papa that was another thing. So I love that too. That seems like it's going to be really dramatic, and then it just kind of isn't at all. Papa goes off to visit, and he follows him and then comes back, and then Opal goes out thinking they're going to have this heart to heart, and then she comes back and Ben just says, he said he didn't care, whatever. But it was just such a different time in those days. And like her talking about Beatrice was younger than her and already married, so it's like Opal by this point is getting older than most people are when they get married. So of course the family probably expected it and didn't think nothing about it. I do think it's really interesting though, go back to how she's not allowed to walk by herself, but now she's going to be married, well, she is married at this point, but they know that, but nobody else knows that. But then now she's going to be able to walk with Ben, but nobody knows that, nobody else. So why couldn't she just walk with Ben anyway, you know? I don't know. I guess because they knew it, because they knew that her and Ben were not really married. They weren't going to let her go off on that big trip with Ben either. So anyway, really interesting. But I love that when Ben says, he said he didn't care, and he's done went to bed. He's done went in there and went to bed. Really bittersweet but touching about how Opal's mother cries, but she don't go in there with them, and she don't say anything. So you know that she was really, probably really happy for Opal, but also was sad. You know, I cried at Corey's wedding. I love Austin. I say, you know, we couldn't have, if we had like filled out a list and made check marks for Austin, that's what we would have got. I mean, you know, you can't do that, but Austin's just the best son-in-law, the best husband, the best daddy, and we're just so proud of him. And I'm just so thankful to the good Lord for Austin. So I'm sure that, like me, even though I feel all that about Austin, still a little bit of sadness knowing when Corey and Austin got married, knowing she's going to leave our house and it won't never be like it was, you know. So I'm sure that's what Opal's mother's feeling too, even though she may feel about being exactly like I feel about Austin. All that did remind me of, you know, again, different times in those days. People just didn't think about weddings like we do today. Of course now, you know, what do they say? The average cost of a wedding is like $20,000, maybe more than that. I don't know. Corey and Austin's did not cost that much money, but it was just a different time, and they just thought about things different. They were more practical because they had to be. That's really it. Today we just lived in the land of plenty and have every opportunity to be extravagant and go over the top and all those things. So anyway, but that part of them going off reminded me of, and Opal's mother going with them, and also the part about Ben telling Papa, and then she wondered if Papa told Mama, reminded me of Granny and Pap. They did slip off, and they didn't tell Granny's mother and father that they were going to get married. Pap convinced her. They were supposed to just go for a marriage license, and he convinced her to get married while they were gone. And I've got a video, I could link to that, and you could watch it. But Granny tells the story about how they had to keep stopping at different preachers' houses. They couldn't find nobody at home, and finally one more, Pap said, and if they're not there, you know, but they were, and so they got married. And then when she went home, though, she had to tell her mother and father, and she was too afraid of her mother, so she told her daddy, and he had to tell her mother, and she got real mad, and her face was real red, Granny says, and she thought she might have a heart attack or something. It scared her, which of course as time went on, I think that Granny's mother, Gazzy, was very, very pleased with Pap, but of course at that time she didn't know that. They only dated 3 months. It wasn't like Austin and Corey that dated for so long. We'd got to know Austin very, very well. Anyway, but yeah, Granny even says, why, after we got married, she liked your daddy more than she did me. So it all turned out okay, but all that reminded me of just that different time that it was just different. And it's funny how society goes on like that and makes you wonder, someday maybe people will be listening to me read about this. They'll be shocked by Opal, but they might be shocked about what we do too today. You know, it might be something to think about. I loved, too, this was another thing I was thinking I wanted you to leave a link for you to go here. On the way back, then the Blue John Smith gets suspicious that they might have got married, because again, that was a common thing in those days, that you just slip off to the justice of the peace or a preacher's house like Granny and Pap did. And so he's suspicious about it. And then he starts singing to him, and she says sung to him all the way home. But it's so funny, he sung In the Pines. I'm going to put a link to that song in the description below. That's a song that Corey and Katie sung. Paul and Pap sung it. It's an old ballad, but it's not a song that you'd want to sing to somebody getting married. And then she talks about the briars there at the end. I've talked about, if you watch all our videos, you know, and if you live in southern Appalachia, you know that anyway. It's amazing the growth that happens every year. Starts in about, April or whatever, and goes right up till the hard frost. You can look around me. I live in such a lush, overabundance area of growth. This is the end of July here, and things are just at that point where it grows so fast and so furious that then it almost, I think of it like it almost ruptures, it almost busts, it almost it's too much. Well, then as the season continues and frost comes, it kills all that back. But talking about those briars, she's so right that they're everywhere. Now there's what we call, blackberry, like she's saying, blackberry briars are everywhere, and they hurt. They scratch you. Raspberries, there's some raspberry briars, like here where I live. I have a wild raspberry patch down there, but they're not as bad as the blackberry, and they're not as prolific. So yes, definitely blackberry briars everywhere in southern Appalachia. And then also what we call like a saw briar, just a different kind of briar. I think one time I looked up and they're green briar, maybe it's the name of it, green briar. But it doesn't really have any fruit on it, for sure. I've never seen it bloom or nothing like that. But it's just kind of a big vine, and she's right. It can get great old big ones. And then there's some, we call them all saw briars, though, saw briars. There's those that get really big and get great old big thorns. But then there's these others, like, that'll get in my garden beds, and they'll catch you. They'll get you because you can't see them. And they're smaller, more flimsy, but they have lots of little teeth on them, just lots of little ones. So definitely I understand about the briars. And in those days, with people not keeping things manicured, like they didn't even have bathrooms at the school, so they didn't have like a manicured yard and somebody mowing the grass around and all that. I can imagine kids playing and running wild and run through one. It would just eat you up. It just would if you run through a briar patch like that. If I go blackberry picking or whatever, I'll, even being careful, I'll have like just scratches on both arms. And certainly if you accidentally run into one of those big ones, it'll just cut you, like she said. Interesting that she had the liniment there and how she made that, and she took care of them and put it on. But even more interesting than that, though, is the punishment of cutting briars. And you remember when she was at Davis School and those two big boys tried to give her a hard time, she said she made them go cut briars, but that was more like she was going to have to whip them or something with it. She's going to give them a whipping with it. So now she's explained, though, that was a punishment. And it was a punishment, helped them to understand not to do whatever it was they'd been doing before, the children, but also helped her, and in turn helped everyone, because it got rid of all the briars around the school. So really ingenious, really. Opal's so smart, really ingenious. She's really, really smart lady. Really smart. I hope you enjoyed this part of the book as much as I do. I hope that you'll leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you. And as always, I hope you'll drop back by next Friday so we can see what happens to Opal next, especially now that her and Ben are married. That's going to be interesting. I'm going to be anxious for the day they can set up housekeeping together.